Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 289 of The Pulp Writer Show. My name is Jonathan Muller. Today is February the 6th, 2026, and today we are discussing how you can use the Universal Monsters to write interesting villains. Before we get into that, we will have Coupon of the Week and an update on my current writing and publishing projects. First up is Coupon of the Week, and this week's coupon code will get you 50% off the audiobook of Dragonskull Shield of the Night, book number 2 of my Dragonskull series, as excellently narrated by Brad Wills at my PayUp store. And that code is Gareth50, Gareth50. And as always, the coupon code and the link to my PayUp store will be available in the show notes. This coupon code is valid through February the 16th, 2026, so if you need a new audiobook to get you through the middle of February, we have got you covered. Now let's see where I'm at with my current writing and publishing projects. As of this recording, I am 63,000 words into Cloak of Summoning, and I am almost but not quite halfway through my outline. So this is definitely going to be a long book, and it's probably going to come out in the first part of March because it's long enough that it will take me a while to finish writing it and then to edit and proof it and everything else. So I'm making good progress on it. It was a very productive week, but I am still not even halfway through, so I think it's probably going to be March. I am also 5,000 words into Blade of Wraiths. That will be the fourth book of my epic fantasy Blades of Ruin series, and that will probably be in April, if all goes well. In audiobook news, Blade of Shadows, as narrated by Brad Wills, is done, and it is slowly starting to roll out to the various platforms. I think as of this recording, the only place it is live right now is my PayHip store and Google Play, but hopefully by the time I record the next episode, it will be available at even more stores than that. Hollis McCarthy is working on Cloak of Titans, and I think she's about halfway or 2/3 of the way through recording, so we should be able to get that to you before too much longer. So that is where I'm at with my current writing and publishing and audiobook projects. Now our main topic, which is the Universal Monsters and the Universal Fears, and how you can use that to create villains. One idea a writer can use to create compelling villains is to tap into some of the universal fears. And in some ways, those universal fears are embodied by the classic Universal monster movies. I mentioned before that in Halloween of 2025, I saw that a bunch of the old black and white Universal monster movies were on Prime Video, so I watched them for the first time since I was a kid. And I was pleased to see that they held up pretty well for movies that are nearly a century old, especially considering these were some of the very first movies ever made with sound, and the filmmakers were kind of figuring it out as they went along. Dracula is a bit uneven because they tried to cram the stage play version of the book into a 70-minute movie, which really doesn't work, though Bela Lugosi's performance as Dracula and Edward Van Sloan as Van Helsing really carried the movie and helped define the characters in the public eye. But the others are all good, and Bride of Frankenstein is legitimately a great movie. But why have these particular movies lasted so long in the public consciousness? For that matter, why do people keep coming back to new versions and new stories of Dracula and Frankenstein's creature and all the others? Partly it's because these characters are in the public domain and you can use them without getting sued, true, but there's a lot of stuff in the public domain that doesn't see the light of day nearly as often as these classic monsters. I think it's because the classic monsters tap into the universal, small u, fears or classic archetypes of the things that people fear in real life. It's interesting to note that most of the classic Universal monsters were either originally humans who became monstrous or creations by humans that turned monstrous. Essentially, the monsters tap into archetypal fears and are exaggerated versions of villains and monsters we might actually encounter on a day-to-day basis. What do I mean? Let's expound. First up, Dracula. Count Dracula is in some ways the easiest metaphor to explain. He's an aristocratic vampire that feeds upon people and gives them nothing but evil in return. Perhaps he will pass on his own immortality to some of his victims, but it's a cursed and hellish form of immortality, and any vampires that he creates are essentially his slaves, sometimes his mindless slaves. Dracula is the fear of the evil elite. This, of course, takes many different forms in the modern era, but it is very much alive and well. The various conspiracy theories that the elite of a society might be devil worshippers or engaged in sinister cults are definitely Dracula adjacent, and based on recent news reports, it indeed appears that at least some of these conspiracy theories turned out to be accurate. More prosaically, rent-seeking behavior is often characterized as vampirism. Rent-seeking behavior is defined defined as finding ways to extract profit without adding value by manipulating the legal or regulatory environment. The landlord who raises rent by $500 a month for no reason, a software developer who reduces features while raising the subscription price, or a financier who manipulates the regulations for an industry while investing in it are good examples of rent-seeking behavior that is metaphorically vampiric. For that matter, it can be downright mundane. The middle manager who bullies his employees and then takes all the credit for their work is a very boring and unpleasant, but nonetheless all too common example of the vampire metaphor in real life. Frankenstein's creature. Frankenstein's monster is a much easier metaphor to explain now than it would have been before ChatGPT went mainstream. There is always a fear that we will be destroyed by the works of our own hands, especially in the last 100 years since the creation of nuclear technology and gene editing. Probably the most famous examples of that in science fiction are the Terminator and the Matrix movies series. However, these days the metaphor for Frankenstein's monster is almost ridiculously easy. We have generative AI to fulfill the metaphor of Frankenstein's monster for us. Karl Marx famously said that history repeats twice, the first time as tragedy, the second as farce. Nuclear weapons as a metaphor for Frankenstein's monster was a tragedy, but generative AI is a farce. The tech bros sold it as this omniscient mind that could solve all problems and eliminate all jobs. What we've actually gotten is an imbecilic chatbot that makes a lot of mistakes, can't remember anything, can't actually do anything right, inflicts widespread damage to the economy, and drives up electricity costs and makes existing products like Windows 11 and Google Search much worse. It's like as if Frankenstein's monster was really, really stupid and wanted you to add glue to your pizza to keep the cheese from sliding off. The Wolfman. The Wolfman, of course, is a metaphor for the potentially bestial nature of man. We all know, of course, or are eventually forced to learn, that human beings have a dark side that can come out in times of anger and stress. Civilization is sometimes a thin veneer over the animalistic side of humans. Sometimes the veneer grows even thinner and the dark side comes raging out in riots and wars and mass slaughter. For Larry Talbot, the original Wolfman in the movie, his situation is even more terrifying. He's a rational man who believes in science and psychology and doesn't believe in things like werewolves. Yet when he is bitten, he nonetheless loses control and transforms into the Wolfman. He doesn't want to transform and attack people, but he has lost control of himself to the werewolf curse, and so he does. In a sense, all humans are werewolves in that we have a monstrous side that can come out under the right, or the wrong conditions, rather. The worst of us embrace that fact, just as in medieval legends sometimes people would make pacts with the devil to become werewolves. The Invisible Man. The Invisible Man was originally a science fiction story, which means that the Invisible Man represents a new fear created by science. Transhumanism is an idea that eventually humans will merge with machines and evolve to become something new. Naturally, many people think this is a bad idea, and so a new idea has emerged. Post-humans, or humans that have been so modified by science that they are no longer recognizably human. So far, this has remained mostly science fiction, but you can see the glimmers of it beginning in biology and medical science. There is a reason performance-enhancing drugs are banned in most sports. Genetic engineering opens up the possibility that corporations could create their own custom humans, essentially their own post-humans. The possibilities for abuse in such situations are, sadly, endless. So, the Invisible Man, like Frankenstein's creature, taps into the fear of science, or more accurately, the fear of what horrors science might create. The Creature from the Black Lagoon. On the surface, The Creature from the Black Lagoon is a monster story about a creature that carries off a pretty girl. I think it taps into a deeper fear, however. Namely that the world is older and stranger and more alien and incomprehensible than we can possibly know. Like, hardcore creationists say that the Earth is 6,000 years old or so, and the traditional scientific view is that the Earth has been around for 4.5 billion years or so, and both groups have neat, detailed charts explaining why their theories are correct. But what if they're both wrong? Oceanographers say that we don't fully understand the oceans, and a common theory among UFO people is that UFOs emerge from hidden bases at the bottom of the ocean inaccessible by any human. There are other theories that there have been entire civilizations such as Atlantis that have vanished without a trace and were more advanced than our own, or that all of human civilization is a cycle that constantly destroys itself and restarts without memory of its previous failures, or that aliens have influenced and controlled human history, or that aliens created the Earth, and this is all some sort of elaborate science experiment. Of course, all these theories are likely bunk, probably. I think it is true to say that not only is the world stranger than we know, it is stranger than the human mind is actually capable of comprehending. And depending on how far that goes, that could be a terrifying thought. So, The Creature from the Black Lagoon, the idea that some race of fishmen lurks beneath the waves that we don't know about, taps into that fear. The Mummy. Like the creature from the Black Lagoon, the mummy on the surface is another story about the monster who wants the girl, since Imhotep waits 3,000 years for his love to be reincarnated. But I think this taps into a deeper fear, namely that we can't escape history, that no matter what we do or how hard we try, history will catch up to us, whether our own personal history or national history. Political philosopher Francis Fukuyama famously wrote a book called The End of History and the Last Man in 1992, arguing that with the collapse of communism, liberal democracy was the final form of government achieved by mankind, and that it would have no serious competitors in the future. This was a nice dream, but I think it's fair to say that the last 34 years since 1992 have proven that thesis profoundly wrong. History is definitely not over, and in every domestic or international political crisis of the last 34 years, you can trace its roots back for decades or even centuries. It took 3,000 years for the dead hand of Imhotep to affect the present, but it usually doesn't take nearly that long for history to have negative effects in the present world. Bonus: The Phantom of the Opera. The Phantom of the Opera is considered one of the universal monsters, but I don't think he really taps into a deeper fear. Maybe just to be wary of a creepy guy who lives in a theater basement and is unhealthily obsessed with the leading actress? Honestly, that just seems like good common sense. Maybe poor Christine Daae just needs some pepper spray or a good solid shotgun. Conclusion. I think each of these universal monsters remains popular because they tap into a deeper, more profound fear. So if you're a writer looking to create a memorable villain, you could do worse than to follow those universal fears. You don't even explicitly have to write horror, science fiction, or fantasy to do it. In a mystery novel, you could have a Dracula-type villain in the form of a slumlord who traps his tenants with restrictive lease agreements to bleed them dry financially, or an Invisible Man villain in the form of a scientist who is illegally injecting college athletes with an experimental drug without their knowledge. The Wolfman appears quite often in detective and thriller fiction as a serial killer or some other kind of violent criminal. And naturally, we cannot escape history, so the Mummy can appear as a conflict that had its roots in events that happened decades ago. Of course, the range for universal fear villains in science fiction and fantasy is much greater. Then you don't even have to be metaphorical. So hopefully this look at the universal monsters and the universal fears they tap into will give you some good tips and ideas for writing villains in your book. So that's it for this week. Thank you for listening to The Pulp Writer Show. I hope you found the show useful. A reminder that you can listen to all the back episodes on https://thepulpwritershow.com. If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a review on your podcasting platform of choice. Stay safe and stay healthy, and we'll see you all next week.